Okay. Thank you all for being here. I'm Leslie Budewitz, and I am coming to you through the magic of Zoom from the woods outside Big Fork, Montana, which is a small town on Flathead Lake on the way to Glacier National Park. And I really appreciate you joining Robert and me here this evening, and I appreciate him setting this up. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I became a mystery writer and tell you about my books, particularly my two new books, which you can see on the slide. Then we're going to talk about the creative process, the generative aspect of it, that is, where ideas come from. And I'm going to share stories that illustrate how specific elements of three of my Spice Shop mysteries came about. I hear that some of you are participating in the library's Creative Writing Club, and I hope to give you some ideas that you can use. And we will have some time for some questions and hopefully even some answers at the end. I did a Zoom last night, and somebody partway through asked me what I was drinking out of the moonshine jar. So I just want to tell you this is water. It's just in a narrow mouth ball jar because I have a cat. And any of you who have a cat know they sometimes like to drink out of your own water glass or stick their paws in it. So that's why I'm using the moonshine jar. So I am a Montana girl, born and raised. I went to Seattle University, which is a small Jesuit college, actually not so small anymore, in Seattle, of course. And that's when I fell in love with Pike Place Market, which inspired my Spice Shop mysteries. I went to Notre Dame Law School and I practiced in Seattle for several years. I returned to Montana about 30 years ago. My husband and I and the cat, who is very old and very loud, and you might hear him, live in the northwest corner of the state. The town we live in is the model for Jewel Bay, the food lovers village in one of my series. I started writing at 4 on my father's desk, quite literally. I did not yet understand the concept of paper, but my parents were amused and kept me well supplied in paper and pens. I started writing seriously in 1995, and like most writers, I have several unpublished manuscripts. To my surprise, my first published fiction was actually in short stories. Because I'm a lawyer, other writers started asking me questions about using the law in their fiction, how to get the facts about the law right in their books. And I regularly gave presentations about the topic. I would answer questions like, if this character is related to this character, how can she inherit? My character needs to get a search warrant. How do I do that? Who is Miranda and why are we always warning her? That led to my first book, my first published book, which is called Books, Crooks, and Counselors, How to Write Accurately About Criminal Law and Courtroom Procedure. And I'm delighted to say that it won the Agatha for Best Nonfiction. I love helping other writers get the facts about the law right in their books. You can see over my shoulder the little black teapot. That is what the Agatha Award looks like. That one is for Best First Novel, which came a little bit later. And I have 3 of them. One is White with Blood Spatter. I'm particularly fond of that one. So these are all my books. I am very fond of the lighthearted side of the mystery world, what is sometimes called the cozy, the descendants of Agatha Christie, or the fictional Jessica Fletcher. No graphic sex or violence, lots of graphic food. The first series I created is the Food Lovers Village Mysteries. And my main character runs a local foods market in Jewel Bay, Montana, lakeside community on the way to Glacier National Park. And the first, Death al Dente, or Murder Not Quite Well Done, won the 2013 Agatha for Best First Novel. There are 5 novels and a short story collection, which includes a historical novella, sort of a series prequel. I also write the Spice Shop mysteries. The tagline there is just a pinch of murder. Pepper Reese is the owner of a spice shop in Pike Place Market in Seattle. When her life fell apart at 40, she literally tripped over her husband, a cop on the bike patrol, and a meter maid, practically plugging each other. And she lost her job managing staff HR for a law firm that imploded in scandal. She bought a downtown loft and the spice shop. these books are a bit of wish fulfillment, right? There are 8 books in the series so far, with the 9th on its way. And the latest is To Err is Cumin. A reader gave me that title. I love it, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. The heart of the cozy is the amateur sleuth who is deeply invested in her community. And in urban or city-based cozies like my Spice Shop series or Cleo Coyle's Coffee House Mysteries set in New York City. You might also know the Tea Shop Mystery set in Charleston by my cousin, Laura Childs. In those stories, the stories revolve around a community within a community. So it functions like the small town in the more traditional village series. Pike Place Market is perfect for that. Some of you may know it. It was founded in 1907 with a mission of bringing producers and consumers together. There are something like 200 stores with doors, 200 farmers, day stall artisans and crafters, 100 bars and restaurants, 500 residents, 10 million visitors, all on 9 acres. Stuff happens. And that gives me a lot of fodder for the series. I fell in love with the market when I was a college freshman. I made it my mission to eat my way through. It's always changing, so I'll never be done. Then you can see on the bottom here 2 additional books, Bitterroot Lake and Blind Faith. They are suspense, written as Alicia Beckman, and the pen name honors my mother and grandmother. I'm going to tell you briefly about my newest book, All God's Sparrows and Other Stories, a Stagecoach Mary Fields collection. It is historical fiction. It came out just last week, and it features a real-life woman named Mary Fields. The stories imagine her life and heart. She was quite remarkable. She was born in slavery in about 1832. She worked for the Ursuline Sisters in Toledo, Ohio, and she came to Montana in 1885, first working at the Ursuline School at St. Peter's Mission near Great Falls, which some of you might have heard of, then in the town of Cascade, where she remained until her death in 1914. In Montana, she found freedom and community and her own place in the West. She is believed to have been the first Black woman in the country to drive a U.S. postal star route, which is the source of her nickname, Stagecoach Mary. She drove a wagon, she drove a buggy, she drove a stagecoach, whatever she could to keep the mail going. And the title story, All God's Sparrows, was originally published in Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine and won the 2018 Agatha Award for Best Short Story. And since I have mentioned the Agathas, let's show off the 3 teapots. They're kind of fun. All God's Sparrows has been a passion project of mine, and I'm grateful to have it out in readers' hands. Actually, I'm also a little nervous about it because it is different from my other books, but early readers have been very kind to it. So let me shift gears here and talk a little bit about the creative process. And I am getting a message that says my internet connection is unstable. I apologize for that. You will still hear me, even if you can't actually see me speaking to you. It comes and goes. That's the price of living in the woods. So for a long time, until at least my 10th book, I did not think that I was very creative. I knew I was smart. I was good at research. I was good at pulling ideas together. I could write well, but creative, not so much. Eventually, that led me to delve into the creative process, to learn more about it so I could deepen and expand my own. And I should say that, it was really rather silly of me to think that I wasn't a creative person. I was writing fiction as almost a full-time job. But I had this idea of what creativity was, and it was this wild, imaginative, weird stuff, and it wasn't my daily living or my daily writing. And I could go on about that, but I want to get to the specific stories and to some specifics about the process. But I want to invite each of you to think about how you might put those roadblocks in your own imagination about how you are or aren't a creative person. Creativity can start with a natural impulse or talent, but it can't end there. There's a reason we talk about it as a process. It most often deepens and develops when we ask ourselves questions, when we push ourselves to do something differently. Uh, there's a slide up here that shows what one of the ways that psychologists talk about creativity. It's sometimes described as a function of three main factors: divergent thinking, plasticity, and convergent thinking. What are those? Divergent thinking is the ability to think of a wide range of different things. If you've ever played the game of coming up with 25 uses for a plastic cup besides drinking, or for a paper clip other than holding papers together, that's divergent thinking. Plasticity is flexible thinking, the willingness to explore and engage with novel ideas and scenarios. And convergence is the ability to pull ideas together into a coherent whole. In short, creativity involves seeing or making connections between disparate things. For writers, it's how a cluster of images and experiences that have nothing in common except happening to or around the writer become an idea that then becomes part of the story. And we will see that in action with these stories, I hope. My first illustration for you is not a terribly exciting one, but there it is. It is the cover of Chai Another Day, which is the fourth book in the Spy Shop series, and a little brown teapot that some of you might recognize as a vintage Brown Betty from the 30s. The background is chai spices. So this is the source of my first illustration for you. As the story opens in Chai Another Day, Pepper, my main character, stops by her friend Sita's studio to get a massage. Tragedy interrupts, and Pepper makes a pot of chai in a little brown teapot that she recognizes as a vintage treasure. It's just something she finds in Sita's kitchen. And she's using a spice and tea blend that Sita's mother sends her every month from where else? India. And you don't know the characters yet, so you don't know that Sita is Seetha. She's American born with an American born but Indian father and an Indian immigrant mother, South Asian immigrant. So naturally, because Pepper runs a spice shop, she asks if Sita's mother will share the recipe for the masala or the spice blend that she uses. Never in a million years, Sita tells her. It's a family secret that even she doesn't know. But once Pepper gets a taste of a spice blend she likes, she's on a mission. When Sita isn't looking, she pockets the packet of tea, and she and her assistant shop manager set out to recreate it. In the process, they uncover the real secret of the secret recipe and have to decide how much to reveal. So where did all that come from? I hope you can follow along here. Mr. Wright, my husband, is an acupuncturist. And a few years ago, a patient brought him some of her homemade granola. We liked it, so he asked her for the recipe. She refused. Turns out that she had commercial ambitions. Granola is so mainstream these days that I can't imagine a recipe from a woman who is not famous or a professional cook having any commercial value. And to my knowledge, she hasn't done anything with it. But hey, if people didn't have strange ideas, where would fiction be, right? Being creative cooks up for a challenge, we made our own, and we like it better. I'm sorry to say that the recipe is not in the book because it doesn't really come into the book, but you can find it on the blog Mystery Lovers Kitchen. MysteryLoversKitchen.com is where I blog with other authors who also write these culinary cozies. And I will tell you, the secret ingredient is chopped dried apricots. So here's another ingredient in the story mix. At about that same time, my mother and I stopped for lunch in a cafe in Helena, Montana. It's the capital city, and it's where she lived. I ordered hot tea, which in itself was unusual because normally I'm a coffee drinker, but for some reason, it was kind of a rainy, chilly day, and I ordered hot tea. When it came, the little envelope holding the bag, when my mother saw that, she said, "Oh, English breakfast. That's what my mother drank. Then she told me a story I had never heard. When she was a child, a small package of tea wrapped in brown paper arrived in the mail every month. This was in the 1930s on a farm in rural Minnesota. My grandmother, who died when I was just over a year old, was a farm wife with 13 children and very little cash. So that monthly package of tea must have been a real treasure and a treat for her. And I'd never known about it. So a couple years later, my mother died, and at not quite 93. And I packed up that little brown teapot that she had packed up almost 60 years earlier when her mother died and brought it to my house. And I set it in a spot where I could see it and smile. Then, not long after, that's when Pepper picked up that vintage teapot that I didn't know Sitha owned to make a cup of tea I didn't know either of them was going to need. And somehow, because brains are strange, my brain poured those two small stories, the woman who wouldn't share a recipe and a packet of tea that arrived every month, into that little brown teapot where they brewed themselves into a subplot. Now, the secret of Mrs. Sitha's mother's tea, her chai, is a side trip. It's a thread involving Pepper's friends and her shop rather than the heart of the mystery. That tragedy that occurred, that happened the day Pepper arrived for the massage. But I love that thread, and I love the story of the teapot because it helps reveal elements of the mother-daughter relationship, Sitha's relationship with her mother far away on the opposite coast, and Pepper's relationship with her mother, Lena, who is in the process of moving back to Seattle for part of the year. Both Sitha and Lena are the daughters of immigrants from different generations and different shores, but that relates to another subplot in the story. Their experiences open Pepper's eyes and tie into an ongoing thread, which is the crucial role that immigrants play in the restaurant business and in the vibrant world of Pike Place Market. And all of that because of a bowl of granola and a cup of tea. The next story I'm going to tell you relates to the 7th book in the series, which is called Between a Walk and a Dead Place. And it demonstrates how a field trip can lead to a setting, which then leads to character and plot. In Walk, as I call it, Pepper investigates when a friend discovers a body in a boarded up building in Seattle's Chinatown International District and believes she's being haunted by the ghost of Bruce Lee, the great martial artist, teacher, actor, philosopher who lived for a number of years in Seattle. This book was a lot of fun to write, in part because it allowed me to indulge my love of research and history. My husband and I visited the Wing Luke Museum in Seattle, and that's the building you see on the slide. It chronicles the Asian experience in the Pacific Northwest. Now, we took a tour of the Kong. It's an amazing, well-preserved community center and boarding house / residential hotel that was built in the early 1880s when Chinese labor was so important to the railroads and canneries of the region. And I could not help think, what if there was a body in the basement, a fresh body? How could Pepper become involved without stumbling over the body herself? I'd already done that to the girl 2 or 3 times, and you know, you can't overdo that. So who else was involved? What other secrets does that old hotel, I call mine the Gold Rush, hold? Sometimes an image is the key to the story. And for me, in writing Walk, the building and the way it helped anchor the community were the keys to the story. Even though I had lived in Seattle for several years, first in college and after law school, I did not actually know much about the Chinatown International District. So I read oral histories that were collected by the museum staff and other resources. And then I found a fascinating book, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I learned from that so that you can see how this all came together. The book was called Building Tradition, Pan-Asian Seattle, and Life in the Residential Hotels by Marie Rose Wong, coincidentally a professor of history at my alma mater, Seattle University. And that book explored the role of residential hotels in the Chinese community. And it also looked at the national and local politics surrounding Chinese immigration in the late 19th century, the Chinese Exclusion Acts primarily, which led to horrible racism and violence. It had maps, it had photos, and I was struck by the constant pressure on the community as it constantly was shrunk and forced to consolidate. You may have witnessed similar experiences in communities that you know, where a freeway literally split the community apart, in this case, I-5. Then there was other displacement when a stadium was built, and there's a current parallel as the regional transit system debates the location of a new station. As I wrote, I realized that one secret of the gold rush was a Chinese pharmacy in the basement, and that's where the body is found. There is no such pharmacy in the Cognac. In fact, I'm not aware of one in Seattle at all. There's one in a small town in Oregon that's been preserved, and there is one in Butte, Montana that's been preserved. And I know a little bit about that because, as I said, my husband is an acupuncturist. So I know a little about the practice of Chinese medicine or Eastern medicine, but I also was able to build shelves in my mind stuffed with old bottles and jars, boxes labeled in ancient calligraphy, and other mysterious objects, things I had seen and things that, frankly, we actually have some of in our home because he likes to collect those things. And so I started to picture those in the basement, but I still didn't really know what was the emotional heart of the story. Why had my building owner hung on to this hotel? When I read Professor Wong's account of traveling with her immigrant father in the Midwest in the 1970s, selling produce and visiting the old Chinese hotels and restaurants, I felt one of those mental clicks that writers lived for. Community is the key to every immigrant, but especially to those who have faced extreme prejudice like the Chinese had. And that sense of community, I realized, was why my fictional hotelier, Francis Wu, had held on to the gold rush long after the hotel closed. That's why he was so determined that it stay in the family, despite his son's indifference. And it's why he did not destroy the apothecary in the basement, despite what it cost him. And I'll let you read the book to figure out what I mean by that. I was doing some of this reading while we took a road trip across Montana. We love historic hotels and stay in them when we can. And we stayed in one that is in a little town called Fort Benton. It is the furthest stop west by steamboat on the Missouri River. And it is also, coincidentally or not, where Mary Fields would have gotten off the steamboat and onto a stage to take her trip to the mission. That hotel in Fort Benton opened in 1880. So it dates from the same era as my Chinese hotel. It's a guest hotel, not a residential hotel or a boarding lodge, but staying there helped me picture the physical layout. I looked at the hallways, I looked at the carpets, the push button light switches, and the staircase, which is important in the climactic scene. So this is an example of that three-legged triangle at work, that triangle of divergence, plasticity, and convergent thinking. I toured a historic boarding house. I read about the residential hotels of the era, and I stayed in a guest hotel from the same period. I was able to meld those three experiences together and envision the gold rush, and I hope portray it for you, the reader. As I was doing all that, I discovered the emotional heart of the story. And that is always the key. You've got to find it when you're writing fiction. It's what drives your characters, creates conflict, and what resolves conflict. And that brings me to my third example from To Err Is Cumin. And this looks like the slide I opened with because it is. But I put it up because I want you to see To Err Is Cumin as well as sparrows. So the main plot into Arius Cumin is that Pepper finds a ratty old chair, this red wingback on the cover. It's not really a wingback as shown, but it's pretty cute. She finds this old ratty chair left on the sidewalk for the taking, and she discovers a large amount of cash in the cushion. And she investigates, never expecting that a wingback will set her off on a trail of deception, embezzlement, and murder, and even put her own life in danger. So here's where I confess to you one of my guilty pleasures. I am a big fan of newspaper advice columns. I read 4 newspapers regularly. If you write, I strongly suggest that you need to read things like newspapers and magazines and find the stories that catch your attention, to expose yourself to all kinds of events and information. And of course, I encourage you all to read newspapers in print or online. Newspaper readership is declining, and studies show that a vibrant local newspaper, whether it's a daily or a weekly, is crucial to the health of communities. And of course, it is crucial to the health of our democracy as well. If you like newspaper advice columns like I do, the Washington Post is Shangri-La. There's half a dozen or more by columnists of different backgrounds and experiences, male and female. Some are snarky, like Miss Manners, whom you might have read in other papers, and some are a little more serious. Reading them is like, it's like eavesdropping on the neighbor you haven't met yet. And I read them in part because it's fun. It's amazing the situations, the trouble that people get themselves into. But what I'm most interested in are the glimpses of tensions, both major and minor, in real people's lives. These columns are a window on interactions that we haven't witnessed. They're a chance to think about situations we haven't faced, asking us to put ourselves in other people's boat shoes or ballet flats and imagine how the world looks like from that vantage. They help us better understand each other and, on the way, ourselves. Like good fiction, they build empathy. Sometimes, of course, they make us laugh, and that's fun too. Some letter writers, LWs as they're known in the business, some letter writers have an agenda, just like some characters in our stories. They want confirmation that their behavior is appropriate, even when it isn't. It's so interesting to me to read them and to see the ways we try to justify and explain our behavior. And yet, the desire for a pat on the head from someone else reveals that maybe we don't completely believe the story we're trying to tell ourselves. And it's so much fun when the columnist turns the table on the letter writer, especially when it's a sanctimonious letter writer, and points out the flaws in their thinking or behavior. When I was planning to Arius Cumin, I read a letter from a man who had committed a crime years ago. He'd planned it. He'd told his wife about it. She'd been against it. He went ahead. No one was hurt, he insisted. I assume it is a financial crime, and he was never charged for it, but I don't know. But now, when they disagree, she threatens to tell their grown children what he did. He's appalled. She's lived comfortably for years as a result of his actions without complaint. So what should he do? And I just think that this dynamic is fascinating. A self-deceiving crook and a spouse engaged in emotional blackmail. Unfortunately, I have no idea what he did. I read every comment and still didn't get a clue. But how could I not use that scenario, bursting with tensions as it is? And I'm going to stop the screen share since this is my last, I think this is my last slide. And yeah, it is. And I want to see your faces. Hopefully I won't mess anything up here. Oh, I guess I don't see you. So, of course, the situation changed when I wrote, and the plot on the page bears little resemblance to the story that the letter writer told. After all, I had to invent the crime. The emotional conflict evolved too, but it's still there. It led to the disappearance of a young woman, and to a man's murder, and some seriously deep water, literally, for Pepper. Then what happened next is also interesting to me. When I was following that young woman who had disappeared, when Pepper and I were tracking that young woman, her name is Talia, around Seattle, there was a conflict that she had with her mother and grandmother, and I didn't know what it was. But newspaper advice columns came to the rescue again. I read a letter from a woman whose daughter had cut off all contact after an argument. Worse, the teenage granddaughter was refusing to communicate with the letter writer, her grandmother. I was struck by the columnist's compassion. "Keep reaching out," she wrote. "Your granddaughter is a child, dependent on her mother's love and physical support. It's perfectly natural, appropriate even, for her to follow her mother's lead. Be the adult," the columnist said. "Work to end the estrangement if you can, but don't make the granddaughter pay for it." So, what do you know? Pepper finds Talia, who tells her how ashamed she is of her behavior as a teenager for refusing her grandmother's gifts and letters. Now she wants to reconnect with the grandmother, but she doesn't know how. Pepper knows just what to say. She borrows from the advice I read in the Washington Post. And maybe Pepper's advice will not only ease Talia's guilt, but maybe it will also help the two stubborn women that she loves resolve their differences. What I love about this is reading advice columns gave me the idea for the struggle that sparked the story, and reading advice columns helped me wrap it up. Good things come from guilty pleasures. So I could have pulled a story from almost any of my books to illustrate how a collection of mismatched thoughts and objects or experiences comes together to spark an idea. But I love these three because they involve different aspects of a story. From Chai, we see the development of a subplot and the deepening of some of the relationships. In Walk, we see a setting and how that led to both a plot and to a discovery of the characters. And in Cumin, we see the way that the emotional drivers of the story developed. But I also love them because these are experiences every one of us has. I guarantee you that you have experienced something today that, if you turn it around in your mind, can connect to something else and give you an insight into your story. That turning it around, that's the divergence and the plasticity we talked about. You can connect it to something else through convergent thinking, and it will give you an insight into your story if you're writing, or maybe into your daily life. So since I imagine that some of you are writers, let me close by giving you a simple exercise. I call it the 3 things, and I use it whenever I'm away from my work in progress, my WIP, as we call it, for a few days, or sometimes even for a few hours. I look for 3 things from my experience that day that I can give my characters. Maybe it comes from when I took a walk on the trail outside our town, and I see the teenage boys, obviously the junior high cross country team. Maybe it's from the way that they jostle and joke with each other, or the way that one of them is half a mile in front of the pack, looking serious and intent. What can I take from that observation and give to some of my characters? The exchange, oh, this was a sad one. A couple of weeks ago, I was in the post office and I witnessed an exchange between an elderly mother, clearly affected by some form of dementia, and her daughter over the lost key to a post office box. And I watched how the young postal clerk stayed out of stayed out of it while keeping an eye on everything. And the moment of unspoken bonding that he and I experienced when they left and I came to the counter. So there's something in that that I can give to my characters. Or maybe it's a bit of dialogue, an interesting outfit, or how the woman ahead of you in the coffee shop keeps changing her mind as she places her order. What is going on with her? You know you want to know, but you never will unless you tell yourself the story. So go ahead. You have my permission. More importantly, give yourself permission to take that little snippet of life in any direction that you want. That is what I wanted to share with you. And I would love to hear from you. You can find it on my website, lesliebudewitz.com. I share book news and peek inside the writing process. And subscribers also get 2 free short stories. And that is on my website. And I'd be happy to have you join me there or on Facebook as Leslie Budewitz author. Anyone else have any comments or questions for me?